Welcome to Hiraeth, the home of modern Welsh politics.
Much of the UK is in a general election meltdown. However, the real world continues, and the reality in many sectors is that it's business as usual. One such area where the real world never stops is the care sector. Carers Week is the annual campaign that aims to raise awareness about the vital role of unpaid carers and the challenges they face. Unpaid carers play a crucial role in supporting family members, friends, or neighbours who may have health conditions, disabilities, and other care needs. They provide emotional, practical, and sometimes medical assistance, often without any formal recognition or financial compensation. Joining us to talk all things care, their contributions to families and communities throughout Wales, and what more can be done, are Jo Phillips. Jo is a full-time unpaid carer for her adult son. She's also the vice chair for the West Glamorgan Carers Partnership Board and is one of the carers reps on the West Glamorgan Regional Partnership Board. She's also a volunteer trustee for Swansea Parent Carer Forum. Hello, Jo.
Hello, nice to meet you.
We've also got Dr. Catrin Meyer-Edwards. Catrin is the head of external affairs at Carers Trust Wales, where she leads on policy research, involvement and social impact. She's also the chair of Mudiad Meithrin, the Welsh language, early years and childcare provider. Hello, Catrin.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Very welcome. And we've also got Rob Simpkins. Rob is the head of policy and public affairs at Carers Wales, the national campaigning charity for unpaid carers. He's responsible for ensuring the voices of unpaid carers are heard at the highest level of policymaking in Wales and across the UK. Hello, Rob.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So thanks all for joining us tonight. But before we start in on the substantive questions, can you tell us a little bit about what your various organisations do and their sort of position within the care sectors?
Yeah, sure. So I work for Carers Trust in Wales. Carers Trust is a UK-wide charity working to transform the lives of unpaid carers. And we do that in partnership with a network of local carer organisations who are delivering support to unpaid carers on the ground, as it were. So we link in through those services to support unpaid carers. And there are 9 of those local carer organisations working with us in Wales.
Rob?
Carers Wales, we're also a UK-wide organisation, so part of Carers UK. We're a membership organisation, so people can become members for free, whether they're carers or supporters. And primarily, we're a campaigning organisation, so we spend a lot of our time campaigning to make life better for unpaid carers across Wales and the UK. We do that by trying to embed unpaid carers in absolutely everything that we do. So whether they're on our trustee board, whether they volunteer with us, lots of our staff are unpaid carers. So yeah, we try and make sure all that lived experience is rooted in everything that we say and everything that we do.
Jo, can you talk a little bit about some of the organisations that you're involved with?
The Swansea Parent Care Forum is a charity now, and it's set up by parent carers of children with disabilities or additional needs. We work strategically, so we've got a very wide membership where we listen to what's happening, what's working well, what's not working so well. And then we tend to sit strategically with Swansea Local Authority and obviously the region and health boards to feed in lived experience and try and help the strategic partners hear the voice of how policies work on the ground floor.
Rob, could you set the scene a little bit for us on Carers Week? And obviously it's about raising awareness about the role of unpaid carers, but what else is there to it?
Carers Week is a multi-organisation kind of week that does aim to kind of raise the profile of unpaid carers across the UK. And so there's themes each year. And this year's theme is putting carers on the map. Lots of the organisations that take part. So it can be, sort of anyone from Carers Wales, Carers Trust, through to, sort of more local grassroots organisations and everything in between, really. And they'll be doing lots of events throughout the week, trying to work with politicians to raise the profile of unpaid carers in the Senedd and, campaigning and things like that. So it's a bit of a kind of umbrella week for lots and lots of activity aimed at engaging unpaid carers, supporting unpaid carers, but also trying to advocate on their behalf as well and in partnership with them and make life better, really, where we can.
Catrin, what kind of strategies are already at play to try and change the perception of unpaid carers? And what more do you think can be done?
I was kind of musing around that before coming on, and I guess part of the piece that I think we almost need to be doing is taking that little bit of a step back and asking, almost why don't we all already know why unpaid carers need to be in focus? Unpaid care kind of occupies that really strange position where it's abundant, it's everywhere. 10% of the Welsh population identify as an unpaid carer. The vast majority of us will see unpaid care within our families at some point, and yet it's really invisible. If you look at it from a general public perception, we don't always know what an unpaid carer is. Many people don't identify with that term, even if they are one. And when we think about what we want from society, we all want to have caring societies where families come together, where communities support one another. And unpaid care almost does this thing where it straddles, you know, where does the state get involved in some kind of way? Because of course, lots of us see ourselves as parents, as brothers, sisters, daughters, whatever it is, and we step in because we do that. It's a relationship-based piece of work. But at the same time, there comes a point when somebody might be caring for 35, 50 hours a week, and actually the state has a responsibility then to step in. What I'm interested in is how can we bring that piece into wider public understanding? How can we change the dial, I guess, so that unpaid carers get the recognition that they deserve? We know that the work that people do in the home care is around reproductive labour, and it doesn't often get valued in the way that it should do. But that's precisely kind of the paradox and the crux around unpaid care. And I can see Joe's nodding there, and I wonder whether you can probably say it more eloquent than me.
I can only give you a lived experience point of view. So I care 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I don't get holidays, I don't get days off, I don't get hours off. So it's not just about valuing. A lot of unpaid carers don't choose to be unpaid carers. It's something we have to do. It's about helping people understand that they are an unpaid carer. I find that looking in society, it's more prevalent of paid care. So if you talk about a carer, paid carers are usually mentioned, not unpaid carers. So it's about recognising and helping unpaid carers recognise that as well.
I'm interested in everyone's thoughts on this question, though, about, you know, you talk about people not self-identifying as carers. Why do you think that is? Do you think it is a degree of, like Joe says, it's not necessarily understanding the categorizations? Do you think it's a question of people not feeling that they are carers, they're just doing what their people in families have always done? Or do you think there's an element of stigma to it as well?
It's all of the above, I think, is what it is. Caring is not one kind of group of people, and caring looks differently for different people. And there will be a group of carers who might start doing an hour or so a week, and that's just something you do. Maybe I'm going to go and do the shopping for mum and dad. All of a sudden I'm doing a few hours more. All of a sudden I need to stay overnight several days a week, and it can be a really gradual process that kind of turns you from just doing things that we might expect to be normal, for example, or within the normal realms of expectation, and doesn't have an impact on our lives. And then all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, very gradually, it becomes something that might be taking up 50 hours of your week. It's because it's that grey, that fluid scale. Often you're not in or you're out, or you haven't noticed when you've crossed that threshold, and that's one of the issues. And it might take someone to proactively ask you the question, not necessarily are you an unpaid carer, because I mean, what does that even mean? But are you looking after someone? I know I checked into the GP surgery the other day, and it on the electronic machine, it proactively for the first time asked me, are you looking after a child or an adult who wouldn't otherwise be able to cope without your support? And it kind of flagged for me, oh, maybe I am. And there'll be other people who have that, but without being asked or prompted, or without having an interaction with perhaps a statutory service or someone else, where you maybe don't have that opportunity to reflect on that status that you might have. I think the whole stigma piece is certainly there. We have an issue around the idea of work and employment, things that happen in the home, unpaid work, as labour intensive and as work like as they are, because they're not in a sense, contributing in that kind of capitalism, system of capitalism, then maybe we don't reflect on the value of it in that kind of way. And not working in paid employment carries a significant amount of stigma still.
I echo a lot of what Catherine said there. So research shows that it often takes people up to 2 years to identify as an unpaid carer. And I think that talks a lot to the sort of gradual journey and process that Catherine's outlined, of that sort of incremental, sort of building up of responsibility and time. For some people, it can look very different. And I think one of the reasons I think we're quite, sort of so keen to raise awareness during Carers Week is that caring isn't, this big homogenous blob of people doing the same sort of thing. It can look very different for very different people. So I think one of the only thing that I would really kind of add to that earlier was that culturally as well, it can look very different. And again, stigma plays a big role in that. So, for some cultures, there isn't a word or, a sort of a phrase for unpaid carer. And we know that actually, even in people's first language of English, sometimes that isn't what they recognise and resonate with. They don't consider themselves to be an unpaid carer. So we spoke a little bit about, the importance of local authorities and health services, for example, being that point of interaction and, having that conversation. Are you looking after someone, and starting that kind of journey to help people recognise and identify earlier on. And I know Catherine, Carers Trust and Carers Wales, we do a lot of work on carer aware stuff and working with health and social care professionals to deliver training and resources to support them to do that. But I think the last thing I'll say is the stigma is a really interesting one. And actually, lots of people that I speak to talk about where we were with mental health, sort of 15, 20 years ago. And, it's much more common for people to talk about their mental health in a more sort of free and open and safe manner that, than it was 10, 15 years ago. And what I think we would like to see is that journey with unpaid care, more people talking about it, recognising it and feeling happy and safe and confident to kind of share that they are looking after somebody and that there are places that they can go to seek support if they need it.
Joe, what was that experience like for you? When did you start to identify as a carer? Was it an immediate thing? And I'm also interested in the kind of conversations you've had with other people that are unpaid carers and how long it took them to sort of come to the realization that they actually were a carer.
So for me, my son was 15 and I saw something on Facebook that was shared. It was about coffee morning. And it had, like Catherine was saying, do you care for someone with behavioural issues, no diagnosis, that type of thing? And I thought, oh my gosh, that's me. I'm that. And that's how my journey started. When I speak to other carers, it is about duty as well. And culturally, Swansea is vast culturally, and talking to unpaid carers, and there is no word for carer. There is no word. It's something we have to do. I think the only thing I would add to both Rob and Catherine would be, from a personal point of view, is that I didn't choose this. I was working. I was paying a mortgage. I was, really active in the community and had a social life. I'm now an unpaid carer, single parent now, living in a council house, living on benefits, and I'm classed as economically inactive. And for me, that is really disheartening because I work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I just feel that, especially with Carers Trust and Carers Wales, it is phenomenal to be able to help or use my voice to help other carers.
Thanks for that, Joe. I mean, we'll definitely get into the welfare aspect of it slightly later in the episode. But Rob, I'm interested in your thoughts on just the general state of the social care system, sort of how is it operating that's led us to this situation that we currently face?
So there's lots of bits of legislation and policy that interface with unpaid carers and look at unpaid carers at sort of local, devolved and reserved settings. Unpaid carers tell us that it's really difficult to navigate that, whether it's, kind of accessing social security, whether it's accessing support locally, that whole process is really, really difficult to navigate. And this is backed up, not just by anecdotal evidence from paid carers speaking to us and other organisations like, Joe and Catherine's organisations, but actually in reports commissioned. And we used to do, just before the pandemic, a report called Track the Act every year, where we tracked the implementation of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, which I guess is probably one of the sort of key bits of legislation in Wales that touches on unpaid carers. And what we find is, the sort of broad principles set out by the Act in terms of, ensuring unpaid carers have enough support, they're allowed to have a life alongside being an unpaid carer, and other kind of key aspects. All of the aspirations, everyone seems to broadly agree. And, there seems to be, quite a progressive and forward-thinking bit of legislation. But actually, what happens is on the ground, the impact on unpaid carers differs wildly depending on who you speak to. And actually, right across Wales as well, across the 22 local authority areas, it's a really mixed picture. And even within certain, local authority areas, implementation of the Act is, it varies very, very differently. And that can have, perhaps a positive impact for one unpaid carer, but on the converse side of that, a really, really negative impact for some unpaid carers as well. So it's a really tricky situation. And the upshot of that is that, too many unpaid carers in Wales are not getting the support that they need to be able to live a life alongside caring, or even, look after their own health or well-being as well.
Catherine, obviously this is an area where there's much policy discussion. In recent years, how would you describe the impact the policy landscape has had on the lived experience of carers?
Well, I was thinking one of the things we haven't spoken about yet is about young carers. And I remember when the Social Services and Wellbeing Act was being developed, a decade ago and more, a civil servant said to me at that point, this is all ages legislation. It's going to bring about the end of the experience of transition. And we talk about transition as going from children's services to adult services. I think probably in terms of the lived experience of some young carers, there has been a positive in that, because we now tend to think of young adult carers as going up to 25. But the reality for most young adult carers who we speak to is that they still face that, not as much of a cliff edge, but definitely that tension, that change, and almost the withdrawal of support as they go from getting children's services to going into adult services. As a young adult carer, you might have support in education. That doesn't exist when you get to be an adult. You're almost left to fend for yourself. You might have had this team around you who are supporting you, and that provision isn't there. So I think there's a real particular piece there around the policy landscape for young carers and young adult carers. I'd also say in terms of lived experience, I think we're still hearing far too much about unpaid carers only getting access to the support that they need when they hit crisis point. One of the big priorities and guiding principles of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act was around prevention. So it's early intervention and prevention. We're having wellbeing support, low-level intervention early on for people to support their well-being. The idea is that prevents needs from escalating. I'm not sure from the people that we speak to that is always the case. I know there are great examples of well-being support out there in the community. I just don't think enough people are getting access to those at this point. And I guess, it's a really tricky position, isn't it, for a service, a local authority, for example, to have to go from where do you put your money? You've got to put your money to meet your statutory duties, to meet legal needs that are outlined in a care plan. At the same time, are you expected to also invest in prevention? Yes, you are expected to, but we know that funding doesn't always follow in that kind of way. So definitely what we're hearing from people on the ground is, when they've crashed, when carers reach crisis points, then they're getting through the front door, but not early enough.
Joe, does that ring true to you?
I think in some cases, yes. There are some really good practice where I, as a carer, wanted a carer's needs assessment, but actually from a carer's needs assessment, I needed something different and not your norm. So usually it's they talk about respite, which is overnight care, or somebody comes in. That doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for my son. So it took 8 months, but that's okay. I sort of said, look, I need my grass cut. because that's going to prevent me dropping. That's going to prevent me going into crisis. I don't have to worry about that, and I'll have time to sit down and have a cup of tea. It took a long time, but actually I know in Swansea, that's what they do. They use direct payments in a way that sits outside the box. So I think the only thing I would add to, looking at policies, it would be to have people with lived experience there, because I understand there's no money there, and I totally get it. But we can save money because we know what works and what doesn't work.
Do you feel like unpaid carers have been included enough in the policy discussions and the formulation of policy, both at a UK and Welsh Government level, Jo?
I'm going to say truthfully no, because locally for me, I will say my regional partnership is absolutely phenomenal at involving unpaid carers. We have got a carer strategy that was co-produced by carers and strategic partners. Phenomenal. What I see different is the higher the level, sometimes it's carers organisations, and I mean no disrespect to Rob and Catherine because they are phenomenal, but it's usually carers organisations that are involved and not actually somebody who's living a day or who lives it day to day.
Let's talk a little bit about the economics of care. Carers make a huge contribution to the UK economy. It's something like £10.6 billion a year. Rob, what more can be done to make people aware of this massive economic contribution that carers and unpaid carers make?
We did that research with the University of Sheffield and produced those figures, and basically worked out that this is by calculating the cost of replacement care. So if all unpaid carers down tools and the state had to step in and fill that, it would cost Wales over £10 billion a year, which is just a staggering amount of money. So in terms of how we, I guess, bang the drum on that, well, I mean, we've seen it across a lot more of our stuff recently, and going forward. But I think, there needs to be a greater understanding. And part of the reason why, we're doing stuff like this is to just raise the profile, because honestly, unpaid care doesn't get nearly enough, of the attention it deserves across the piece. So until we start to focus in on some of the, I guess, specific facets and aspects of unpaid care about, sort of saving money, it's just that wider sort of awareness initially. But I think, the economic aspect is a really important one. It shows that, not that it should need it, but there is a business case, to supporting unpaid carers, and that, as well as all of the, transformative work that unpaid carers do to the people they provide care for, that, there is a function where, they'll save the state money. So actually, by investing in unpaid carers and giving them, the capacity and resource to continue to provide care in a manner that suits them and the person they provide care for, you save money in the long run, and you have a healthy society. So it's a tricky one. I think the quantitative sort of stats and the economic aspect of it are a really important part of the argument, but actually sort of getting to the root cause of the impact that it has on individuals, that's much more difficult to quantify, I guess, and put a figure on. The two have to go hand in hand as well. Sorry,
Catherine, you're going to get my first cynical question of the evening. In policymakers' minds, then, obviously unpaid carers are saving them a lot of money. How would you incentivize policymakers to invest in something that for them is a saving?
Yes, I'm glad you've asked the cynical question, because it's the one that everybody's thinking. What we don't recognise in that piece there around unpaid carers actually saving the state millions of pounds. I think it's around, when you do the modelling, it works out around 8.6 billion in Wales, and that's huge, and it's comparative to the health and social care budget for Welsh Government. So it is significant. What I'd like to see is more recognition, formal recognition of the contribution of unpaid carers as part of not as that. I don't want to use exactly the same word as workforce, but I'm struggling to find a different word. I'm struggling to find the equivalent. And the reality is that unpaid carers will be able to contribute. We want more people to stay at home. That's part of the policy agenda for Welsh Government and other governments across the UK. You don't want to put someone in more costly social care provisions, such as care homes. You want to keep someone able to live at home as long as possible. And to be able to do that, the reality is that we do need family, friends, and other unpaid carers who are able to come and support that person. You need to invest to save. essentially. You need to invest in the support for unpaid carers that will sustain them in that role. If we burn people out exactly the same way as we're seeing people leaving the formal health and social care workforce because they're burnt out, unpaid carers are being burnt out as well. If we don't put in the support to allow them to take their regular, whatever it is that gives them the right respite. For Joe, it's having someone mow the lawn. It might be for my nan being able to go and have her hair done once a week. You know, if we don't do those things that are regular and early on, then we reach a point when they just won't be providing any care.
Joe, I saw you nodding along there. I'm sure you've got some thoughts on this.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, so, you know, for unpaid carers, we don't get holidays. We don't get holiday pay. We don't get sick days. We're not allowed to. You know, for me, that is a really, really important part. And it is trying both physically and mentally. A lot of people don't understand that. So I'm 42 years old. I've been caring for 21 years. I now, as a 42-year-old, I've got rheumatoid arthritis. I'm isolated. I'm lonely. I don't get to go out and have social life. So, you know, having support, so whether that's peer-to-peer support or, you know, it doesn't cost a lot. Therefore, I can continue to care. If I'm not caring, like Catherine said, my son would have to have residential, which is going to cost a lot more than, you know, having my grass cut or, you know, having somebody round for a cup of tea.
Joe, I really want to talk about that the mental health element of this. We'll definitely come back to it. But whilst we're on the economic aspects of it too, obviously there's been a lot reported in recent times about the clawbacks to carers allowance and overpayments. I'm doing air quotes for those who can't see, by the DWP. What kind of reforms and safeguards do you want to see put in place for this, Rob?
I think, yeah, mulling over how to say this in the current period. Thanks for that, Matt.
It's fine. I very much enjoy asking my friends very awkward questions in the middle of a general election campaign. It's fun.
Yeah, thank you. It's much appreciated. There's a few kind of key ingredients, I think, from our point of view. I think, you know, first and foremost, there needs to be a much clearer, much more easily navigable process, you know, sort of entry point, you know, sort of duration throughout this process and exit point for unpaid carers. You know, the current system whereby even if you go £1 over your earning limit or a penny over your earning limit for carers allowance, which is pitiful, I think it's about £151 a week, then you have to pay back the full week. Yeah, the risk there attached to that is for unpaid carers who we know are disproportionately impacted by poverty compared to the wider society is pretty stark. So yeah, a reform to the, you know, sort of the clarity, I guess, of the process for unpaid carers to make it much easier. And again, you know, as Joe said, unpaid carers aren't people that are inherently time rich. They don't have loads and loads of time on their hands to be checking, you know, their incomings and their outgoings. And honestly, again, you know, being disproportionately impacted by poverty, most people don't want to spend a lot of their time looking at their bank balance. So reform of that process to make that easier. The eligibility criteria is another really tricky one. So if you earn a certain amount, then you're not eligible for carers allowance and you have something called like an underlying eligibility. So for example, people in receipt of the state pension are unable to claim carers allowance. And we know that lots of unpaid carers are part of an older demographic. So that contributes again to poverty. So we would want to see reform to that as well. But also, you know, carers allowance is the lowest benefit of its kind. That's in, you know, spite of the fact that, you know, it's meant for work that, you know, Joe has you know, so eloquently alluded to earlier. You know, caring is hard. It's really, really hard and it's draining. So we'd want to see the value of carers allowance to be much more reflective of, you know, this kind of the work that unpaid carers are putting in. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment and hoping to release some research in coming weeks or months, depending on what happens and when this, you know, PERDA period ends and whatnot, which is, you know, considered some different models of this. So for example, in Scotland, there's a small top up to carers allowance. I think it's about £11 a week, which just adds, you know, a little bit extra for unpaid carers to help, you know, financially. Equally, you know, could we look at a significant increase to carers allowance? You know, could we look at model it on something like, you know, the national living wage or the real living wage? These are all things that, you know, we would love to see the next UK government consider, because one of the big, if you could pull one big policy lever that would have a, you know, a big impact on a large number of unpaid carers in a very short space of time, it would be to really, you know, overhaul the carers allowance system and social security and make it, you know, reform the eligibility criteria, make it easier to understand and navigate, and hopefully, yeah, more reflective of the work that carers put in.
Actually, listening to that again, overpayment system in terms of you earn even a penny over, you lose the whole amount. That seems crazy to me, especially when you consider the other rules that DWP have in place for things like earned and unearned income with regards to universal credit. So why are they so strict with the carers allowance rules?
I don't know the reason why they're so strict, and I can give you another example of one of the pieces that we Carers Trust have been looking at, and that's around the 21-hour study rule around eligibility for carers allowance. If you study for more than 21 hours, so if you're at university but you still care for 50 hours, then you're not eligible for that. And the same for colleges, of course. I guess one of the things that has come out of this horrible situation with overpayments is that there is a wider understanding amongst the public and decision makers about the unfairness of carers allowance as it currently stands, and it feels like there is a movement of both unpaid carers standing up and the public more generally recognising that carers allowance is not sufficient recognition for the significant hours that unpaid carers are putting in, and that the system does need to change.
Joe, what's your experience of the benefit system and carers allowance and how the rules work in practicality?
I'm a bit frightened to answer it.
You don't have to ask you if it's okay, if you'd rather not.
I find it really, really tricky. So for me, you know, when you're talking about if you earn £1 more, a lot of unpaid carers like myself, unfortunately, have to live on benefits. So if you're on the old style benefits, your carers allowance gets taken off you. So I don't get any more than Joe Bloggs next door. And actually, I'm caring 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So for me, I really like to see that change, because as an unpaid carer on benefits, I have to use food banks quite regularly where I can. And I tend to go outside of my locality because I've got 2 other children that their friends may see me in the queue. So there's a lot of stigma against that as well, when actually, you know, I've got to leave my son or get arranged care to go to a food bank. So, yeah.
Well, one of the reasons I ask, Joe, is because obviously in Wales, we've had a very long conversation about pros and cons of a universal basic income. And obviously that has been trialled in Wales for care leavers, but I'm very interested in what everyone's thoughts are on UBI and whether you think it would be of assistance to carers.
So Carers Wales doesn't have any particular sort of position on UBI, and I think the main reason for that is because, you know, to be honest, we're so far away from it, you know, in terms of it becoming a reality. That said, what UBI would, you know, sort of offer, or I guess what it would bring is, you know, talk to much of what we talked about with regard to reform of social security, you know, making sure that carers are, you know, financially stable enough to not have to look over their shoulder every month, worry about having to choose between eating or heating, having something that recognises, you know, the work that unpaid carers do. Unpaid carers are providing, you know, sort of medical support to people. You know, some things they're having to do, operating, you know, sort of hoists and lifts. It's crazy, and you know, to expect people to get by on carers allowance whilst doing all of that is tricky. So I think, you know, from our perspective, UBI is part of a wider conversation, and I think perhaps there are probably many steps between now and that point. But you know, certainly there are groups of carers that we speak to who are strongly advocating for UBI, and every other carer that we speak to that isn't advocating explicitly for UBI is advocating for greater financial support and recognition of, you know, the role as being an unpaid carer. So I think we welcome that discussion, but equally, I think there are probably steps between now and there that have to be taken first.
Similar to Rob, when the UBI trial came in for care leavers in Wales, that really piqued my interest. I can see real similarities between the situation of care leavers and young carers. You know, that we know that young carers are less likely to achieve degree qualifications than young people who don't have caring responsibilities, as well as impacts on employment, for example. So having that extra support to get yourself started, to have a fair future, really feels like it could be a great opportunity for young carers in Wales. It feels at the moment like, as Rob says, we might be several steps away from that. And I also understand that there are real technical difficulties if we were going to push for young carers having universal basic income. One is around identification in the first place. I mean, lots of young carers don't know or don't recognise themselves as that. But there's also the point of how do you, when you're a care leaver, if you're someone who's experienced care, you've been in local authority care, it's black or white. You either have or you haven't. As a young carer, you might provide 10 hours of care, you might provide 60 hours of care, and there is quite a difference between, or the impact on you and your future prospects could be quite different depending on the level of care that you provide. So what's the point at which we say that's significant enough that you would get access to that particular support in life? There are lots of things to work out. I guess I'm just really interested to see the evaluation of that UBI piece and to understand what can we do in Wales to take that forward if that is potentially a solution or a way forward for supporting unpaid carers, who we know, as Rob says, you know, one of the three things that unpaid carers always tell us is what are the biggest priorities. It's more money is the biggest, getting respite and getting support for the person that they care for tend to be the big top three, and finances, it's got to always be there on our agenda, and we should definitely be having an eye on UBI in Wales.
So Joe, you mentioned earlier about the mental health impacts of care. Could you try and describe a little bit of that for me, and how widespread you think your experiences are with other unpaid carers?
I think it goes twofold for unpaid carers. I think the mental health impact of caring, you don't realise it's actually happening. You live through traumatic events, whether that be hospital appointments with schools. There's lots of traumatic events, so it's a big journey. Then there's the mental health effect of you're on your own all the time with your cared for. Friends, family members don't always understand why you can't go to events or go and meet them for a coffee. And then to access mental health help for yourself, but maybe you're cared for as well. And we know that that is really, really difficult. So from a positive angle, I'm really, really lucky that my mental health support is more about peer-to-peer support. And we've got some really good examples from, you know, where I live, but across Wales, talking to other carers across Wales, there might not be that for them.
Rob, Catrin, in the conversations you've had with other carers, what would you like to see governments do in order to tackle concerns over mental health in the unpaid caring community?
Before I go on to sort of what we would like to see, every year we run a survey called the State of Care in Wales survey that focuses on unpaid carers' health and well-being and their finances, and sometimes about carers juggling employment as well. And I think just to kind of paint a picture around Joe's lived experience there, and talk perhaps, you know, a bit wider to some of the carers and findings that we get in there, because they are stark. Like the findings of this are just continually bleak. 85% of the carers who answer that survey say they feel stressed or anxious, 51% feel depressed, and 49% feel lonely. 36% of the unpaid carers with poor mental health had experienced thoughts related to self-harm or suicide. This is a real issue and isn't isolated, you know, to sort of small pockets of the unpaid carer population across Wales. if there's one thing, I guess, that we can sort of ask people to take away from this pod is that, without urgent action to address some of these issues, the outcome's going to be really bleak. 76% of carers in that survey are worried about being able to provide care in future because of either, their mental or physical health, or finances. So in terms of, I guess, what we want to see is a greater dedicated support for unpaid carers, and that isn't just sort of mindfulness sessions. That there's a place for that. I'm not trying to dismiss that at all, but unpaid carers have to be prioritised when accessing mental health services and support, because often it isn't just about the unpaid carer, it's about their ability to continue to provide care for the people they're providing care for, whether that's one person or more. Lots of unpaid carers provide care for more than one person as well. So we have to see that priority piece with regard to accessing mental health support, but equally, again, and we spoke about this earlier in the pod, it's that awareness piece with health and social care professionals. If someone's coming through your door as a mental health professional, one of the questions you really need to be asking them is, are you an unpaid carer? Or probably actually better, are you helping to look after someone? Are you looking after someone? One of the many different ways that, we try and use that hook to have that conversation. So recognition, but also increased, sort of capacity and resource for support, because without it, we're heading down a really dark road, not just for Wales and as a society as a whole, but, for hundreds of thousands of individual people, with lives, who deserve better.
In some ways, doesn't it come back to, not entirely, but partly back to that policy intention of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, where we're thinking about wellbeing, prevention. It's not just about providing the acute social care, it's about doing those low-level things that keep people connected to the communities, connected to other people, reducing loneliness and isolation, having peer support. Those things go a long way in preventing those needs from escalating to where somebody might need full psychotherapy or counselling. Just being connected to other people is really, really important. And that's why having a particular centre, a local care organisation, or an organisation that specialises in the condition of the person that you care for, where you can share things with people who understand what you're going through, those things are really important in terms of carer support. They're also one of the smaller or the softer things that might sometimes get lost. So it's really important that we champion that low-level support for mental health.
I always hate this last question because I know that there is no silver bullet. There is no one policy that solves everything, but it doesn't stop me asking it every time. So I'm going to ask the same to you all. If there was one thing, whether that's UK or Welsh government could do, that you think would make the biggest impact to the lives of unpaid carers, what do you think it would be? Joe, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, and I'll be brutally honest. I think for me, it's just listen to us. We know what works. We know what works for us, but we also know what works for our cared for. So we can help across with lots of different policies, and we do save money and support us to keep going. I think the support, whether that be financially or, low level, it does make a massive difference.
Thanks, Joe. Catherine?
My turn to turn it around. I think I'm not trying to avoid the question, but I almost think we need to accept that. Are we looking for a silver bullet? Because actually we're not, this is not a situation where we're looking for a cure for unpaid caring. It's not a disease that we're going to bring about an end to. It's not a cruelty to an animal that we want to eradicate. We actually want unpaid caring to continue. We just want people to be better supported in that position so they can continue and they can feel good about themselves and maintain their health and well-being. So I'm not looking for a solution. I think it's exactly as Joe says. Every unpaid carer knows what the support is that they need. I'd say for us, we know that what we need is a really great social care system so that when people need a break, if a carer needs a break, that there is someone to step in and they can step in and not feel guilty about it or not feel under pressure about it.
Rob?
I'm going to use that well-trodden avoidance path there and then follow that, because I think Catherine's point is exactly right. There isn't a silver bullet. There's not one policy lever that you can pull that will fix, the issues that unpaid carers face. And again, that talks to the fact that, caring needs differ wildly. Different people need different support, and their caring roles can be light or heavy, and that will change. But I think Joe's point around just listening is key. If that's the first thing somebody can commit to doing, is listening to some unpaid carers, whether that's in their constituency or region, or if they work for a local authority, sort of just take a bit of time. Chances are you probably know someone that is an unpaid carer if you aren't one yourself, and just listen to, what they're telling you about, what they need. And then from there, we can talk about financial support, we can talk about policy change. But yeah, I think that first step of just recognizing and listening, and treating unpaid carers as equals around that policy table is the kind of most important one.
Joe, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, it was just sorry, it just had a fleeting thought that for me, a lot of unpaid carers' stress and difficulties are around their cared for. So I think improving the system that cares for their cared for would actually improve things for unpaid carers. Therefore, they wouldn't need so much support.
I just wanted to say thank you all so much for coming on the pod this evening. If people want to hear more from you, where can they go find you on social media sites? Katrin?
Well, I am on Twitter/X, Katrin M. Edwards. If people want to connect into their local carer organisation, there's a function on the Carers Trust website, carers.org, that's Find My Local Service. So that'll put you in touch with local services across Wales and across the UK.
Rob?
Carers Wales is the best place to find all the stuff that we do. So at Carers Wales on Twitter or on Facebook.
Great. And Joe?
Probably for me would be Swansea Parent Care Forum website.
And again, thank you all so much to our wonderful panel. If you have enjoyed what you've heard, please don't forget to find Hiraeth on all the socials at Hiraeth Pod. You can go to our website, www.walespolitics.com. And thank you very much for supporting us with your ears. If you would like to do so with your wallet, you can go to www.patreon.com/Hiraeth Pod.
Thank you for listening to Hiraeth. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate and review.